Good afternoon. It's now Saturday afternoon in Tokyo. And I've closed the blinds. It's a bit sunny outside, but it's much easier to do this way. And I'm facing my computer, which is on the desk. So I'm doing this from a different angle than usual because I'm going to read from my computer today. And I actually thought about what I might read today. And originally I had thought maybe I would do Sherwood Anderson. And I didn't mean to do this. And so I decided to save Sherwood Anderson for the next time. And I'll put the music back on. I'm actually running a playlist of 153 tracks, over 20 hours of music I've recorded this year, including my I Am a DJ compilation, which is my unofficial remixes of other artists. And I just have it on shuffle. This track is called Broken Television. I'm just going to leave it running quietly in the background. But what I want to read today actually connects with other things I've talked about on the page. And one is that I went to Brown University for a Master of Fine Arts in the Literary Arts program between the years 2008 and 2010. And unlike a typical sort of academic program, the final project for the program was not an academic paper, was not a research paper, which I did prior to that when I did Japanese literature at the University of Colorado. I have a master's degree in Japanese literature where I did Abe Kobo, or Kobo Abe in English. But the final project was a creative project. And I don't remember what the minimal limit or requirement was, but I know that I went well over it because what I ended up doing was writing. Basically, I wrote a novella, a short novel. And when I say short novel, I mean longer than Beau Jardin. I mean like a short novel, but it's not Moby Dick, you know? And then I also had been writing many short stories. So I created a sort of collection. And the last story of the collection then is a longer short story. So between a novella and a short story is a novelette. And then you have novels. And novels can be anywhere from 200 something, 300 pages to thousands of pages, right? Like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, the Russians like long novels, for example, or Moby Dick I mentioned, right? Great American novel. Idea of great American novel tends to be this kind of brick. Paul Auster, late in his career, wrote 4321. That's a brick, that book. Okay, so what I want to read today it's actually from the short story collection, but it's the final story of the collection, and it's a novelette length story. So it's around the length, I guess, of Beau Jardin, maybe a little bit shorter. This particular story actually won the John Hawkes Fiction Award, which was at Brown, and that year it was judged by Robert Coover. And Robert Coover, who's a postmodern writer, I did not know him, he did not know me. I was in the program and he was there at Brown, but I was not taking his classes and I had never really spoken to him before. It was chosen, anonymously. And I guess, I don't remember how the submission process worked exactly, but we submitted fiction or poetry. I think there was fiction and poetry. Maybe not, because John Hawkes is fiction. I think it's just a fiction award. And then I guess there was a separate poetry award, which was not John Hawkes Award, it was something else. But at any rate, it was submitted anonymously, and then, this story was chosen. This particular story, the novelette, by the way, it's called Girl with Smear. And I'll talk about it a bit and why I'm reading this one and not something else or not some other series, which I will read eventually, maybe some other things. from the collection another time. But it was also published on an online literary fiction journal, but I believe that journal went belly up, like so many of these online journals have just sort of disappeared over the years. And this is several years ago. It was like 2009 or 10 it was published. So that's like what, 14, 15 years ago, and it's gone. So for all intents and purposes, this story is unpublished, although it's in the Brown archive. The entire thesis, if you will, the novella, my collection of short stories and novella, are, if you go to Brown's archive for the year 2010, when I graduated, it'll be there under my name, Marc Lowe. But otherwise, it's not in the public space, since the journal have been in is gone. So, I mean, I have a lot of material like this, a lot of short stories and novellas and things that I could actually either, like I've said previously, self-publish or submit to some journal or other, or publisher or other at some point. I'm just not very sort of ambitious in that way. I enjoy making work. I don't enjoy the process of looking for homes outside of, you know, I tend to self-publish things, be they fiction or essay, like my writing blog now. The blog, I have the blogger page that I might as well announce it. I often include the link. I have a Project Gutenberg's Winesburg, Ohio up here, because I was going to read from that, and I will read from that in the future. That's a little spoiler. I won't say which stories or which things, but Sherwood Anderson I'm going to do at some point. But my blog is marclowemusician.blogspot.com, and actually I was considering reading some of my nonfiction from this site. I have an essay called Broken Reptile about my ex-band experience, and I also wrote about them in a longer essay I published here in 2023, without beginning or end. I think it's without end or beginning. I flipped it from the album title of my album, without beginning or end. I made it without end or beginning. And that essay also talks about my first band, Chattering Man, and other experiences, and also themes in my work up through around the time I restarted This Dark Shroud in 2023 in the summer. Anyway, the Blogspot page has more recent thought pieces, poems, essays. That longer without end or beginning essay, it's basically a book-length essay. I may actually extend it and bring it more up to date, or re-edit it and extend it. I also published an essay which I attached as a kind of PDF about solitude and creativity, and I may do a reading of that or sections of that. And so all these ideas I have just going through my head, what to read today. And I sort of waffled, and I was going to do Sherwood Anderson, and then I had another idea, etc. But I've decided to read this novelette, which is, as I say, a part of the final project I did for Brown in 2010, submitted, and was, you know, you have to, it was one reason I was able to graduate. It was a creative program, but I was writing all this stuff anyway. I put it together into a collection along with the novella. The novella, which has not been published outside of the Brown archive, and which very, very few people have ever read. I may do something with that. Again, I don't know if I will have the motivation, energy, wherewithal to kind of shop it around for a proper publisher, but I might, we'll see, self-publish it somewhere or do a reading on this page in parts, because it's a bit longer than Beaujardin or today's Girl with Smear, Novelette. Let me say just a bit about the collection, and then this. So I mentioned it won John Hawkes Award, which was judged by Robert Coover that year. and also that it was published in another online journal which has gone belly up, so it is no longer online. This is, just to preface it, a story about a painter, and how it connects with the last reading I did. I did Bowie's Nathan Adler diary, the nonlinear drama, Gothic drama hyper cycle. This is not non-linear. Well, it kind of is. It's kind of, you'll see, it's kind of weird. It does sort of go in and out of reality or fugue-like states. And I say that because I recently taught Brian Evenson's fugue state. And actually, I was, one of the reasons I was so, I was encouraged to apply to and try to get into Brown's MFA program is I wanted to work with Brian Evenson. He's not there anymore. He's at CalArts, but he was at Brown, and he was actually the chair. He was, I guess they had a rotating position, and he was at that time the chair for 2 years or something. So he's always like exceedingly busy. But he took the time to, chat with me, and I had a private one-on-one with him for fiction, just kind of chatting and, talking about fiction things and writing things and books to read and stuff like this. And when I went back, just today I was looking at rereading some of the short stories. I didn't reread the novella today that I had written, but, and actually Girl with Smear, I didn't read the whole thing. I just sort of looked at it. I'm going to read it from now. I'm revisiting it for the first time in a while, but I do basically remember it. So, but rereading some of the other short stories in the collection, some of them I remembered well, and others were like, oh, wow, I had forgotten about this, or oh, wow, this is really dark or violent or horrible. And I mean, Bowie Jardin is very dark, but some of these stories are really dark and violent. And I think Evenson's fiction, especially his earlier fiction, The Wavering Knife was my introduction to Brian Evenson, or Altman's Tongue was his first collection that got him in trouble with the people at Brigham Young University, which was a Mormon university, because of the violence that was in the novel. And I don't want to talk too much about this because I'll do that when I talk about Brian Evenson and do a reading of his work. But anyway, there's definitely a bit of that aspect to some of the stories I was writing at this time. The Girl with Smear, it's maybe too loud. That's a fire from Mr. Shroud. Girl with Smear is not, I wouldn't call it violent, no. It's a bit sexual at times, a bit graphic at times, a bit weird, and definitely a bit weird and fugue state-ish, like I said, mentioning Evenson. Also, some of his stuff, just to go back to that for just a moment, is literally like very graphic violence, but some of it is more psychological, psychological horror, let's say. And I think this piece that I'm going to read is more like this. It's more psychological horror, or I'm not sure if horror is the word that readers would use. It's surreal, maybe, or irreal, surreal, kind of flitting in and out of states of sanity and madness, this painter. And how it connects to the Bowie, a little bit from last night that I read, the Nathan Adler diaries, that Bowie was, talking about art. He talks about more the art world, and he's talking about actually quite violent, right? Body parts and these kinds of things, which also connects with Evenson's fiction and other things, I thought, when I was rereading it last night. But Bowie was, in addition to being a musician and an actor in films, he was great in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. He was great in The Hunger, The Man Who Fell to Earth, which was his first film when he was still kind of immersed in his semi-Kabbalistic cocaine quasi-fascism world. In addition to these things, he was also a painter, and he really took it quite seriously. And he also wrote critical articles for an art magazine, I think, around the time of Outside in 1994 or 5, that period. And so this story is about a painter who kind of goes crazy, goes mad. And actually the opening quote is Francis Bacon, the painter. Francis Bacon. Another thing that's interesting to me to think about, and I thought about it at the time when I wrote this, and I don't remember why exactly I wrote or had the idea to write this particular piece. My music is kind of like this too. If I just get inspired and I go and see what happens. I don't outline. When I write fiction, I never ever outline it first. I never sort of, do it that way. Of course, I go back and sometimes re-edit and change things later, which like music, right? You go back and when it comes to recording, not live obviously, or spontaneous live things they are what they are, but for like something like Fire, like this, where I'm layering things and doing separate parts, I might, right? But I just, same with the music, I just, I do, and then later I can sort of reorganize and shape it. And that's the way I wrote this, and that's the way I wrote pretty much all of my fiction writing was like that. My essays and all of it. And my talks, it's all off the cuff. This talk right now is off the cuff. So, going back to this, why did I write about a painter? What's interesting about it is that obviously I do all kinds of art. I have on this wall, which I'm not showing today, but some of my artwork, my cover art for my albums or CDs or streaming LPs, whatever you want to call those, which, either I'm taking a photograph and using that, or I'm manipulating something with color, this, that, the other. And this is, I believe, is this The Red Pill? This is, Are You Awake Yet? The Red Pill by this Dr. Trav. This is my most recent album right now on Shuffle Play. So, that's the closest I get to doing something akin to painting, okay? My brother, Jeff Lowe, he also goes by Jeffro. Lowe is a tattoo artist in the US. He's done it for years and years. He has his own shop now. And he also paints, and I've seen him paint. At the time I wrote this story, I was married, and my now ex-wife's father was and is a painter, and he would work on large canvases, and he actually painted me a number of times around that time period, and those paintings were displayed in his art book and stuff. So, those were two people I guess I was thinking of, sort of my brother and my father-in-law at the time. He was Japanese. But I myself, I do music, obviously, I do video, obviously, and video editing, and the artwork, as I've said, for my covers, and photography. I'm not a professional photographer, but I love to take photos and video and things. But I don't have canvas or paints in my apartment, and I don't go to a studio to do that. So painting is not one of the things I've done. I'm sure I could. When I was younger, I used to draw, make pencil drawings, or pen or pencil drawings, or even color, whatever. And not just like scribbling like kids do, but like as I was moving into my early teens, I was still doing that. And at that time, my brother, who's 4 years younger than me, was not doing that. And I remember my father used to say that, he liked my drawings. He used to look for it. I would show, hey Dad, I drew this, I drew that. My parents were divorced, and I would go visit him on the weekends, and I would show him my drawings and stuff. And I remember at one point, I don't know why, but I sort of stopped doing it. I sort of lost interest. And later, my brother was the one who ended up picking up that torch, if you want to call it that. And he started doing drawings and painting. And then he didn't know what he was doing, the career. He didn't go to college and ended up being a tattoo artist. He makes way more money than I make. And he lives in a house with 2 dogs in the yard and stuff. He's married. So, and I live in this, shoebox. So, but, I went to college and grad school twice, right? And that's not the point of the talk. But so getting back to painting, drawing. So my brother is a visual artist. He tattoos and he draws and paints, and also does animation, like the Skeletal Bus. He made an animation which was from his drawings. Now he does computer animation. And I kind of stopped drawing by the time I was 12 or 13 or 14 maybe. By then I had stopped doing drawings and I never really painted. But this story is imagined. Like I say, my brother is in the family, he's a painter. My mother actually used to paint a bit. My great-grandmother started painting in her 80s, and her paintings are on display even to this day in the museum. I mean, there's she's not a famous artist, but she's not unknown. I mean, her paintings are not, you know, they don't cost thousands or tens or hundreds, you know, tens of thousands of dollars or something, but they're still for sale, and there's a website with her paintings and things, and I won't mention her name, but rest in peace. My great-grandmother, who was from Minsk. So I guess painting is, even though I don't paint, it's in my blood somehow. You know, this, I mean, it's one aspect of art, right? So if I were to go into a studio and someone gave me some paint brushes and paints and a canvas, they said, go for it, I wouldn't feel uncomfortable just doing it, if you will. I mean, I'm not, you know, studying it, but it's in my blood and my consciousness. So I wrote this story about a painter who kind of drifts off into madness. And this is Girl with Smear, and it's fiction. It's completely 100% imagined, as I say, because I myself am not a painter. So I think I've said enough about this, maybe too much about it. And since it's not that short, I guess I should get started and do the reading, although I'm enjoying this time. Hopefully those watching are, you know, I mean, you know, I teach at university in Japan, and they have what they're called koma, which is like in the States, like a period, right? Well, we say period 2, period 3, period 4 in Japan too. Gen is the word, ichigen, nigenme. But the koma is usually between 90 and 100 minutes in Japan. That's standard teaching time for me. So I've been talking for 20 minutes or so, and that's, you know, it's still like not even a third of my classes even finished yet, right? So it may feel like a long time I'm talking for the viewers of YouTube land, but for me this is nothing. This is what I do. But I've said enough, I think, for the introduction, and without further ado, I'm going to open up my Brown Literary Arts thesis from 2010 and the final story. And by the way, let me just say one more thing. This collection that I put this into, like I said, there's the novella, which I won't mention the title today because I'm going to read it or publish it or do something with it later, and I'm not going to talk about it today. But the collection, the name of this collection of short stories that I submitted was Syllannibal, stories or fictions. Actually, fictions, like Borges calls ficciones, and I call these fictions rather than stories because they're not all stories, and some of them are sort of experimental and sort of, some are stories and some are kind of in some other liminal space. They're a bit experimental or postmodern or postmodern, whatever the hell label you want to give. I hate labels. Music, same thing. What is the genre that I do? I don't know. If you listen to 10 different things, they're different genres, and I don't know what they are. Do you? You know, people say, oh, it's ambient, or it's noise, or it's electronic or electronica, or it's, you know, singer-songwriter, acoustic, or folk. Some people said when I do acoustic, it's folk music. I don't think I'm a folk music artist at all, even the acoustic things. So that's why I don't like labels. So I call them fictions, following Borges' kind of model, if you will, and Syllannibal, and that actually is a reference to, quiz question, almost nobody will get this, I think. If you know the answer, put it in the comments. Syllannibal, where does that come from? Ooh, yeah, if someone gets that right, I'll be really surprised, but actually it's something that would be obvious to anyone who's familiar with it, knowing my interests. This is Girl with Smear, Girl with Smear, and then it's called in a novelette. The end of the collection, Syllannibal, which is fictions, 2008 to 2010, and I think this one was written in 2009, right in the middle of that. It was my second year before graduation. It opens with this quote from Francis Bacon: "You could say that I have no inspiration, that I only need to paint." Okay, let us begin. Day 1. I arrived at the studio late in the afternoon and had a look around. There before me I saw a 48 by 36 inch canvas, oil paints and brushes of various thicknesses, a stone bust of a snaky-headed Medusa, a small refrigerator and gas burner, etc. I sat in one of 2 wicker chairs, lit a cigarette, and stared at the blank canvas, which reminded me of a large white chess square. I watched the spiraling smoke from my cigarette swirl before the blank square, really a rectangle, of the canvas until my fingers began to burn. Dropping the spent butt, I crushed it with my shoe as if it were a squirming centipede. This brought me a sense of satisfaction, albeit temporarily. Day 2. Arrived at the studio bright and early today, surveying my surroundings as if for the first time I felt a sense of, I'm not sure what. The sun was coming in through the slanted rectangular window behind the canvas. The branches and leaves from the large tree outside the window formed a perverse shadow face surrounded by light, one that seemed to smile and grimace alternately with the movement of the wind. I placed my black shoulder bag down on the floor about 4 feet from the canvas and looked over the painting supplies. Putting on some water, I flipped open my cell phone and texted my agent at studio. Everything perfect, talked soon. The skin on my bottom lip was dry. It flaked off when I rubbed it with my forefinger. Once the water had boiled, I poured myself a cup of tea and sipped at it, sitting in the wicker chair. The canvas looked as though it had grown larger overnight. Day 3. Cloudy today. The studio was dark when I arrived at 9:15. The row of LED lights that had been installed 2 weeks ago illumined the work area in a profusion of stark brightness, reminding me of the lights used in an operating room. Intense, sterile. I was just about ready to start prepping the canvas for my work, which has been commissioned by a special client whose identity I cannot reveal here, when the landline, which rested on the floor in the corner of the room to the left of the canvas, rang. The model had the flu and wouldn't be coming today, perhaps not until next week. "That's preposterous!" I shouted into the receiver without consideration for the speaker at the other end of the line. "I'm here and I'm ready for her, but can't you begin work on the background?" the voice on the phone said. I grunted and hung up. No use doing anything today if the model isn't coming. Though I should probably have started prepping the canvas with gesso, I felt tired and irritable. "I've got all week to prep," I told myself. "Tomorrow is another day." Day 4. Arrived at the studio with a hangover. Bad way to start things off. I'd hardly put my foot inside the door when the landline phone began to ring. "The model is in the hospital with pneumonia," the voice at the other end said. "We're looking for a replacement and we'll let you know as soon as one's found. In the meantime, please start working on the background. We can't afford to be late with this project." "We?" I said. "Whose reputation is at stake here?" I was seething. "Yours or mine?" "Well?" No answer. "Fine. I've already got the background half done," I lied. "Send the new model as fast as you can or I'll start painting from a photo instead." I hung up the phone. Then I went to the small refrigerator to get myself a soda, though what I really needed was some water. I looked at the blank canvas, which no longer reminded me of a chess square or a rectangle, but rather a slab of concrete wall that had been removed from its foundation. Some light from the window behind it seeped out in broken lines across the wooden slats of the floor. I sighed as I drank. Day 5. I didn't get to the studio until sundown today. I was all ready to start prepping the canvas when suddenly I felt a sharp pain in my right eye and I had to sit down. With my eye closed, I drank a beer, the cheap stuff, but it did what I wanted it to do. And then I took the bottle of gesso out and poured some of it into a tray. When I searched through the brushes, however, I was distraught to realize that there was no gesso brush. "What's the meaning of this?" I screamed aloud to no one. My voice echoed in the room, and the stony gaze of the Medusa head seemed to echo the echo somehow. I flipped open my cell phone and texted my agent. "No gesso brush? WTF. Send immediately." The day ended on this sour note. I realized there's no use crying over spilt gesso, but it was a waste nonetheless. Day 6. Woke up with a head cold, stayed in bed until past noon, and dropped by the studio in the early evening to find that my gesso brush had been delivered and that there was a message on the landline. They found a replacement model, someone who resembled the first in both face and body, and that she would be there the following morning. Feeling drowsy from the cold medicine I had taken earlier, I put a pot of water on for tea and began to pour the gesso into the tray. I took a break to drink the tea and then, standing on the stepladder, began brushing the first coat over the uppermost left-hand corner of the canvas. But it was no use. I was dizzy and sapped of energy from the cold. Took a nap in the corner of the studio. When I awoke, it was completely dark, and the gesso in the tray had dried out. Cursing under my breath, I made myself another cup of tea, washed out the tray, and poured more gesso into it. And this time, I was only able to cover about half the canvas before I felt tuckered out. I left the studio to buy some ginseng drink and returned with it, still feeling lousy. After drinking the ginseng, I fell asleep on the floor a second time. Day 7. I opened my eyes to a gray morning with a light, misty rain falling outside. I'd left all of the lights on the previous night, so the room was bright and hot when I got up. Feeling my forehead with the back of my right hand, I questioned whether I had a fever. I was sweating and felt slightly chilled. No matter, I told myself, I have to finish prepping the canvas at least before the model arrives. I'd worry about the background later, as I still had or have another 13 days to complete the thing. I washed my hands and face in the large sink. Though as there was no mirror, a minor detail my agent had neglected to provide for, I could neither deny nor confirm the image in my head of how I might look after a night of sleeping on the floor of the studio with a cold. I ran some water through my thinning hair, which was wet with perspiration, before shutting off the tap and drying myself off with a paper towel. The pain in my right eye was back again. It hurts me as I write this, though not quite as persistent or as sharp as it had been the other day. I am thankful at least for this. Stumbling over to the tea kettle, I filled it with water and flipped on the gas burner. As I was doing this, there was a knock at the door. I suddenly experienced that inexplicable something I had felt when I'd entered the studio many days ago. Something bordering on panic. I walked over to the door uneasily, and opening it, I found that there was a package there for me without a return address. I signed for it and thanked the postal delivery woman. Closing the door behind me and walking over to the table, I tore the package open with unsteady hands. At first, it appeared as though there was nothing inside. But when I looked more closely, I saw that there was a tiny wrapped object hidden away inside the layers of tissue paper inside the box. Unwrapping the object, I found myself looking at the first digit of someone's forefinger. Male or female, it was impossible to say. The nail was not polished. There was no threatening note accompanying this most strange or strangest of objects. Was it real? I was not sure. It was too difficult to tell, as the digit was coated with something inorganic, perhaps some sort of plastic resin or lacquer. Unable to determine whether it was a human finger or just a good replica of one, I wrapped it up again, but before I was able to toss it or the box in which it had arrived into the trash, there came a second knock at the door. Hiding the wrapped fingertip in my pocket, I approached the door. The box was on the floor near the sink, out of the way. When I opened the door, I was surprised a second time. It was not the model, but rather my sponsor, the one who had commissioned the painting. I explained to him in no uncertain terms, not fully opening the door, but so that he could not see far enough inside the studio to view the canvas behind me, that the model was sitting naked inside, and that I was very much in the middle of painting her, despite my looking a bit too clean for that, and that therefore now was not a good time to show the work, please come back in a few days, and so on. He tried to convince me that I should show him my work in progress now, but I insisted that now was quite impossible. Naked! Finally, he went away, assuring me that he was very excited to see the painting as soon as possible. I continued to smile until he disappeared, and then I shut the door, turned off the burner, the water had been boiling furiously, and nearly collapsed. I was sweating again, my body alternating between hot and cold. I poured myself some tea. As I began to sip at it, I remembered the finger in my pocket. I took it out, unwrapped it, and looked it over again. Ah, indeed, it must be real, I thought to myself. So I decided I would save it, telling myself I'd do a small painting of it after all of this business with the commissioned work was finished. I should have been prepping the canvas. My cell phone started to ring, to beep. The text message on the small screen read, "Did Gesso brush work out all right? Hope your work is running smoothly." Then the landline phone started to ring. The second model's father had just been hospitalized. She would come tomorrow instead. After finishing my tea, I shut everything down and left the studio, shivering like a nervous child despite the mild weather outdoors. And now I am shutting off my bedside light to sleep. My head feels like a soppy sponge. Day 8. Too ill to get out of bed, I texted my agent who got in touch with the others. Model should come tomorrow instead. This was fine by her, the model, as she wanted to visit her father at the hospital again anyway. He seemed on the brink of death. I didn't want to hear the details. Day number 9. Feeling much better today, though the strange pain in my eye is still there, albeit duller. Arrived at the studio at around 9 a.m., poured some gesso into the tray, made some tea, and began coating the canvas. I had just finished the first coat when there was a knock at the door. This time it was she, the woman. The woman was young and very beautiful as expected, a brunette with blue-gray eyes, thin, plucked eyebrows, a narrow, slightly upturned nose, and thick, voluptuous lips. Beneath her artfully done makeup, however, I could sense her tiredness. Not even the foundation could fully hide the dark rings under her eyes. "Come in," I said. "I've been waiting for you." She smiled with one half of her mouth and entered wordlessly. Once I'd closed the door behind us, she turned to me and, with a sort of curtsy, offered me her limp hand, which I kissed dutifully. "I'm Mirabelle," she said, "and of course I know who you are. I'm very pleased to have been chosen for this job. You are infamously picky about your models." This is true, though I no longer choose them myself. She continued to talk about how honored she felt to be in my presence and so on. I was hardly listening, to be honest, and I just grunted after everything she said. Her facial expressions were entrancing. That half smile of hers, both asymmetrical and lovely, attracted me in a way that is difficult to express. I led her to the wicker chair on which she was to pose. "You can undress behind the canvas," I said. "No one will see you through the window. There is a large tree blocking it, and this is the 5th floor anyway. Take your time. Would you like a soft drink or some tea? Or I have beer as well, if you prefer." She politely declined, and by the time I returned to the canvas, she was already sitting, stark naked and with crossed legs, in front of it. I realized with a start that I had not yet mixed my paints, as I'd only finished the first coat of gesso when she had arrived. She seemed to catch on to this without my saying anything and leaned back in the chair, uncrossed her lovely, smooth legs. As I was uncomfortable about my lack of preparation, imagine me, the respected, if not exactly famous, artist she so admired. I took out 2 cigarettes, lit them, and offered one to her. Fortunately, she was a smoker. Placing the glass ashtray on the floor between us, I sat down cross-legged in front of her as if I might kiss her feet. And smoking, asked her whether she had any questions for me before we got started. I said nothing about having to mix my paints first. Her first question was whether I was in fact ready to paint her. No, I said, my face feeling a bit flushed. Not really. I didn't think so, she answered, the curious half smile of hers. She blew smoke rings into the air, licked her full lips. Well then, I'm going to get dressed. Unless you have any better ideas. Like maybe you getting undressed too? That would work for me. I must admit, I was taken aback, as none of my models had ever suggested such a thing before. As a professional, though, I was forced to decline. After she left, I felt that indefinable feeling again. I realized my penis had stiffened inside my pants and was pressing against the severed finger in my right hand pocket. Day 10. Please don't ask me to write anything today. I can't bring myself to do it. I'll write more tomorrow. Day 11. Yesterday was a sham. The model didn't show up. She didn't call anyone to say that she wouldn't be showing up either. She just disappeared and left me waiting in my studio, anxious, worried, annoyed. I smoked 2 full packs of cigarettes and drank the rest of the beer that was in the fridge before sundown. It wasn't until nearly 8 p.m. that I got a call on the landline saying she had apparently left town and that they would now have to look for a different model. I didn't have the mental energy to put a second coat of gesso on the canvas, though that's exactly what I should have done. I was planning on 3 coats from the start, and all I had, or have, is a single coat thus far. Today, I arrived early, put up water for tea, and sat staring at the canvas, smoking a cigarette. The sky was a strange color this morning. The light coming in through the slanted window painted the room a reddish, almost sinister hue, while the canvas appeared the color of a blood orange. I lit a cigarette, watched its orangey tip flare and burn, and then I looked back at the blank rectangular canvas again, which today appeared as a second window, a window into another universe perhaps. As I sat and stared, something stirred within me. I don't know exactly what. I had the urge to do something reckless. An urge so great that it finally won out over my rational mind. Standing up, I heard the wicker chair hit the floor behind me. I rushed toward my supply of oil paints and began squeezing the tubes one by one, haphazardly, though perhaps not so much haphazardly as intuitively, upon different spots, the canvas, smearing them with the palms of my bare hands until I was sweating and gasping for breath. When it was over, I found myself holding my head in my paint-covered hands and dry heaving. This lasted only a few moments, however, and soon I took a number of steps back, away from the canvas, but was somehow too nervous or frightened to look up and to see what I'd done. I turned off the burner. Nearly all the water had boiled out by this point, though the pot was 3/4 full when I'd placed it there. Staining the black knob with 2 stripes of yellow and green and a hint of red, I walked over to the sink and washed the paint off of my hands, though I didn't bother with either my face or my hair. On the way out of the studio, I picked up the wicker chair and put it back upright, not once so much as glancing at the canvas or the spent tubes of paint lying on the floor. My heart was racing, and the urge to be reckless, to destroy something, remained for some time. Where did this feeling come from? Why had it come over me so suddenly? Evening. I receive a text message from my agent. They found a replacement model. She will arrive tomorrow morning. I need a day off, but I can't tell my agent this. I will drink tonight and try not to think about the mess I made in the studio earlier. I'd never done anything like that before. Perhaps I'm still ill. I know I will regret my impulsiveness in the morning. Day 12. I had a most disturbing dream last night. The model who had undressed for me the other day, I don't remember her telling me her name, though I think it was Miranda or maybe Mabel. She was with me in the studio, in this dream, seated on the wicker chair. Behind her, the canvas loomed like a watchful eye. Onto it, and by extension onto her, were projected scenes from my sordid past, things I haven't thought about, haven't wanted to think about in many years, things too terrible to repeat here. The model was naked in the dream as she had been in real life, save for the fact that her wrists and ankles were bound with gesso-soaked rags. She wasn't struggling or scared or anything like that. Rather, she had that sort of half smile upon her lips, while I, the me in the dream, less bald, less corpulent, altogether younger, I couldn't stop watching the films projected onto the canvas, as though I were Alex in A Clockwork Orange, my eyes held open against my will. In the blink of a sleeping eye, the model's skin became rotten, like a piece of bruised fruit. Large splotches the color of eggplant skin broke out upon her face, her neck, her breasts, her stomach, all the way down to her extremities. She asked me if I wanted to sleep with her, but I could only sit there with my mouth hanging open. Just as something seemed to burst forth violently from beneath the skin of her belly, I woke up. Groggy, feeling quite out of sorts. I haven't yet gone into the studio. In fact, I'm writing this from bed. What time is it? Certainly past noon. I've turned my cell phone off as I don't want to be disturbed. The fingertip, I keep calling it a digit when it would be simpler to just say tip, sits on my night table here beside me. Who could have sent it? And why? Were they trying to scare me? What for? Is it somehow connected with the painting I've been commissioned to do? How did said person know to find me here at this studio? The location was a secret to all but a few, after all, so this narrows down the choices quite a bit. The choice of possible senders quite a bit. Feeling sleepy now, I'm going to put down my pen and notepad and set my alarm for 2 o'clock p.m. The new model is supposed to arrive at 3:30 unless something has changed. 2:49 p.m. Text message from agent. The new model has had to cancel. She's worried that we are not going to make our deadline. I worry that we are. Back to my nap. 11:03 p.m. I slept all afternoon long, woke up less than an hour ago, in fact, to the sound of my cell buzzing. I've been asked to start painting from a photograph just in case. I think I'll improvise at this point. I no longer care what my patron thinks. I no longer care about anything except who sent me that strange finger digit and why. For some reason, I've suddenly become obsessed with this question. I'm going to go and make myself a nice cup of tea and brandy and then think about this some more. Day 13. Woke up and went to the studio at 8:30 a.m. When I got there, the door was already partially open. I stepped inside cautiously and surveyed my surroundings. Everything that should have been there was there, and no person or persons were there in the studio. However, as I approached the smeared canvas I had left behind 2 days ago, I noticed something odd about it. This was the first time I had scrutinized what I'd done. The colored paint seemed to form the shape of a finger, pointing accusingly at the viewer. Further, there was a small box on the table next to the gas burner with my name, but no address on it. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the box, looked around to make sure there really wasn't any intruder about, and I opened it with my bare hands. Like the first box, it was stuffed with tissue paper, and like the first, there was an object inside. But this time it was not someone's fingertip, but it was rather half of a bloodless ear, the upper part minus the lobe, like a half-crescent moon or a shell one finds on the beach. And again, like the first time, no note was to be found accompanying the strange object. I looked around again suspiciously, but I was, in fact, quite alone in the studio. I pocketed the ear fragment, which was coated like the fingertip in a plastic-like substance. I tore the box to shreds and threw it in the trash. And then I proceeded to stare at the canvas. It no longer looked like a finger pointing at the viewer. It looked more like the half-crescent ear I had just put in my pocket. Or was I seeing things? The painting was, I realized, a giant Rorschach blot. How it appeared depended on the viewer's, in other words, my, state of mind at the moment viewed. And this made me feel, I don't know. As if the painting were perhaps an entity of its own. Not something that I created, but something quite outside of me, the so-called artist. And then my cell phone began to buzz. They'd found a model. She could be here as soon as this afternoon. Was I ready? Yes, I texted back. Ready. What occurred during the 3 or so hours between the call and the arrival of the model is nearly impossible to set down in words, as I don't really understand it myself, but I will try. I pulled up a chair and sat down, gazing at the painting to determine whether it would morph before my eyes, as it had morphed between the time I determined it to be a finger and the time I saw it as an ear crescent. After some time sitting there in a meditative, or rather a near vegetative state, I forgot where I was and what I was doing, and my mind began to wander aimlessly. It was then that things began to get really weird, for not only did the painting morph into various objects that both seemed to possess symbolic significance and simultaneously seemed devoid of meaning, but the objects also became three-dimensional. They wafted toward and around me, leaving the canvas upon which they had until then been contained. It wasn't until the steady knocking upon my door penetrated my consciousness that I stopped staring and these objects stopped their autonomous dance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The objects, knives, guns, screws with pointed tips, surgical tools, bottles of arsenic, shards of glass shrapnel, fragments of bone, gelatinous eyeballs, fingernails, toenails, sheets of flesh, clotted globules of blood and mucus. A dizzying array of horrific oddities brought to life by my imagination. Or were they? None of these objects tried to attack or hurt me, but their very presence was threatening. Was it I who created these things? Out of spattered paint and repressed anger, when I smeared the canvas in a burst of rare passion a few days ago? Was I, and am I, headed for a total mental breakdown? How can I explain this experience on paper in rational terms? How can I understand it without fully believing that I am starting to go quite insane? Knock, knock, knock. The model's at the door. I must go and let her in. I must paint her, but when I open the door, no one's there. The model arrived later, accompanied by her pet dog, Maggie. She immediately took off her clothes, but the thing I painted resembled more of a blur of color than it did a human form. When she saw what I'd painted, she spat on my face, dressed, and stormed out of the studio with her flea-infested dog. She had expected something else, apparently. So had I. Day 14. Slept in again. I seem not to have any energy for living. My dreams were filled with horrific images of human appendages, delivered to me in a series of boxes within boxes. I would wake in a cold sweat, fall back asleep, and the dreams would resume as if without a break. I am afraid to sleep, yet I cannot stay awake for long due to my extreme exhaustion. I feel that if I don't stop the dreams from recurring, I will eventually go mad. Day 15. When I woke late from a fitful night sleep, again filled with those nightmarish boxes and their squalid contents, I discovered that someone had left a number of messages for me on my cell phone, both text and voice messages. It was my manager. Who wanted to know what the problem had been with the model, as there was little to no chance of finding a replacement at this point. She also wanted, or needed, as she put it, to know how the painting was progressing. She warned me that my patron would be stopping by the studio tomorrow, in other words today, to see what I was up to. She hoped I was doing, if not well, then at least okay. I stumbled to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and then pulled off my ear. The hole it left on the side of my head did not bleed. I threw some water onto my face and corrected the image. My ear was still there, where it was supposed to be, and there was no hole in my head. I brushed my teeth, not bothering to shave, and then I dressed. There was a pile of clothes, probably dirty, in the corner of the bathroom, near the tub. Realized that my shirt was inside out only after I had put it on, but I was too tired or perhaps lazy to fix it. And then I got my car keys, my wallet, and my sunglasses. The sun wasn't out, but I have sensitive eyes even when it's cloudy. And I headed to the studio. And when I arrived, my patron was already there waiting for me. I immediately recognized his red Jaguar parked in front of the building and swallowed air without actually breathing any of it into my lungs. When I got out of my car and approached the outer door to the studio, he was standing behind the awning there, smoking an unfiltered cigarette. He looked for all the world like a lizard in a three-piece suit. Slender, pointed nose and eyes reduced to slivers, darting tongue, thin lips, greenish skin. He had had a liver problem from years of drinking. To me, his flesh looked more green than it did yellow. I greeted him with a slight dip of my head, which felt both heavy and light at the same time. He did not return the gesture, but rather gazed at me coldly as he took a final drag from his cigarette before extinguishing it under the heel of his shiny black shoe. "So, how is my painting coming along?" he said. "May I see it?" "I take it there's no naked model in the studio at present, and with the deadline fast approaching, isn't it time you allow me a little peek?" I tried to smile, but felt more like a grimace, and answered in as cordial a tone as I could muster. "I understand why you're here," I said, my voice hoarse and cracked. "But I'm afraid I have a policy of not allowing anyone to see any of my paintings until they are completely finished. Call me superstitious, but if I show it to you now, it could have an adverse impact on my creative process, thereby leading to a disastrous final result. Won't you wait a few more days? Then you shall see it in all of its polished glory." My patron just continued to stare at me. His eyes opened wider now. They were bloodshot, the pupils so large I could barely make out the thin circle of blue-gray that surrounded them. "You must be joking," he said flatly. "I'm paying you good money for a product. I could care less about your personal policy, which has nothing to do with our agreement. You and I are in a binding contract. We are married, essentially, like it or not. And unless I agree to a divorce, we stay married. Now, you are going to let me upstairs to see the painting. If you do not, something terrible will occur. Something you do not want to have to contemplate, believe me. I have friends in high places, very high places, as well as some occupying the lower rungs of society, if you will, who will do anything for a buck and do not fear the law. Let's go upstairs, shall we, my friend? Let's make this as painless for the both of us as possible. Not knowing what else to do and feeling as if my entire face were about to slide off of my skull and fall splat onto the pavement, I nodded automatically. As I reached into my pocket, however, I stopped myself from moving forward, for there was both the fingertip and the half-crescent ear I had received in the mail. I held these out in the palm of my hand and asked, in an emboldened tone, whether my patron knew anything about them. A smile played upon his disgustingly thin lips as he denied any knowledge about the objects whatsoever. Fine, I said. Fine. Is this what you meant when you threatened me just now? My patron frowned this time, making no attempt to hide his displeasure. Instead of insisting we go upstairs together again, he walked past me and around the driver's side of his car. I'll see you in a few days, he said. This had better be your masterpiece. I tensed, opened the front door, and ascended the stairs to the studio without looking back. Feeling a great sense of déjà vu, I noticed that the door had been opened already by someone. Fearing an intruder, I looked around me, but no one was there. A package sat on the table beside the teapot and burner. I was terrified to open it this time, and so I just stood there looking at it until I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. Turning my head to see what it was, I was struck across the face by a cold, possibly metallic object. Whatever it was, it knocked me over, and it took me a few moments to stand up again. When I did, I could find no evidence of the thing that had struck me, be it human or otherwise. And then I saw the painting, a black canvas with a single layer of gesso on it. What could be the meaning of this? What had happened to the painting I had done the day before of the model atop the abstract painting I had earlier created? Blank. Had someone stolen my work and replaced it with a blank canvas? Or was my memory of the previous few days, how many I'd forgotten? I'll have to reread what I've written afterward. Was it completely skewed? And whatever the case, there it was, a black canvas with a single layer of gesso. There would be no more models, I knew, but I could always paint them from a photograph. Yes, this is what I would have to do, but there was still the issue of the package. What could be in it? Another finger, another ear, a few toes, someone's brainstem. Should I open it now or wait until later? And was it from my patron or was it from someone else? Did he put one of those friends he had mentioned up to it to scare me? Why was he now engaging in threats to my personal safety? Couldn't he see that I was already a wreck over the painting? And that I just needed some time to let the inspiration flow through and out of me? I need to stop writing now, as I'm again quite exhausted. Sleep and more nightmares await. There is indeed no rest for the wicked. Day 16. I opened the box. It was empty inside, save another box inside of it. And inside of that box, yet another box, just like in the dreams. However, when I got to the final box, expecting to find another severed appendage, all I discovered was air and a small piece of red paper with the letters EXH written upon it. EXH. What could this be in reference to? What did this mean? And who had written them? Things were becoming less and less clear. I wanted to hire a private investigator to decode all of these veiled messages that had been sent to me, but I couldn't afford one, nor did I want to have to deal with more people than necessary. My manager, my patron were enough to handle for now. I was in fact looking forward to painting from a photograph rather than having to acclimate myself to the presence of yet another model in the studio. But this package really had me perplexed. It didn't match the contents of the first two packages, and the tiny paper with E, X, and H written on it made no sense. Perhaps it wasn't supposed to make sense. Perhaps the paper had been accidentally dropped into the final, smallest box before that box had been put into the other boxes surrounding it. I was at a loss and my head hurt. The pain in my right eye was back as well. After a number of days, having been free of it, things were not going well. I mean, I had to paint. I opened the cabinet to take out some gesso. And there was another knock at the door. My manager. I hadn't seen her in ages. All of our communication was generally done through text messaging, as she was usually out of town and too busy even to speak on the phone. But now here she was, in the flesh. Her hair, which she normally dyed red, looked like a hornet's nest. A good inch or so of gray roots were showing. Her bulgy, hazel-brown eyes were underscored by dark, baggy rings, and her nearly flat chest seemed sunken, as if a heavy load were pressing down upon it. She wore a red top and gray slacks, the pleats barely apparent. "May I come in?" was all she said, without looking at me. Her voice was broken and faint. I motioned her inside wordlessly, too stunned to speak. I pulled out a chair and she fell into it, as if too weak even to lower herself into a more comfortable seated position, and once she did, her posture fell slumped, like that of an old lady, though she was only in her late 30s, not exactly geriatric. I offered her a beer, which she accepted gratefully, and then I prepared to hear what she had to say, realizing only at that moment that she was seated directly in front of the blank canvas I had recently discovered myself. Her mouth opened, but no audible words came from it. All I could discern was a sort of raspy exhalation, which smelled of something foul, as if she had just swallowed a mouthful of sour milk mixed with garlic cloves. I said nothing, hardly breathed. Instead, I showed her the little red piece of paper. Know anything about this? I asked. Any idea of what this means? But she was not looking at the paper. Rather, she was staring at the blank canvas, her jaw hanging limp, her tongue like a piece of pink felt in her mouth. "The painting is gone," I said. "Someone must have stolen it. I came into the studio today to find this here, blank, as you can see." She did not respond, however, but she just continued to stare and gape and stare at the canvas. And when I turned to look at it again, I saw that, in fact, it wasn't blank, but that there was a painting of yesterday's model there, though her naked body was covered with smears of the most nauseating colors, mostly yellows, greens, and some spattered red streaks, like blood. And this wasn't what I had painted yesterday, nor was it the blank canvas I had just been looking at. What was going on here? How could this be possible? I too stared, trying to figure out who had done this painting and how it had appeared so suddenly to replace the blank canvas. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the fingertip and then the ear. Or at least I thought that's what it was pulling out, but the objects I now held were made of rubber and shaped like these tiny little sparrow eggs. Rather than show these to my manager, I hastily put them back into my pocket. Not knowing what else to say, I asked my manager what she thought of the painting. "Brilliant," she said. "But your patron will kill you when he sees it." Day 17. After my manager had left, I passed out on the floor of the studio from exhaustion, only to have more of the same dreams, of boxes within boxes revealing appendages in the final, smallest box. This time it was someone's nose. It looked a lot like Michael Jackson's nose after his multiple plastic surgeries. And then there was a literally green thumb and 3 cracked yellow teeth still attached to a clump of pinkish red gum. Flesh, not chewing gum. When I awoke, I was lying directly beneath the canvas, which loomed over me like a tyrant with its bold colors and its splashes of green, yellow, red, and undertones of purple, orange, pink, gray, and almost every other color under the sun. I stood up, my legs shaking like gelatin, and I tried to survey the painting objectively, but my eyes were still half glued shut by crusty mucus, and when I rubbed the stuff out of them and reopened them wide, what I saw before me made me swoon. It was a painting of a naked woman, definitely one of my models, her face smeared so that the features were indistinguishable. Her skin was a sickly green, breasts slightly pendulant, sex red and inflamed, and across her midriff the letters EXH scrawled in red. Who or what is this EXH? I thought to myself, but the next moment I looked, I saw that the letters were gone. Instead, where they'd been, a transparent hole in the model's stomach remained, as though something had eaten right through the canvas. When I say transparent, I mean that literally there was a hole in the canvas through which I could see the window. And through the window, through the hole revealing the segment of window, shone a bright white light. The landline started to ring. I raced over to it, picked it up, and heard a familiar voice at the other end of the line. "It's done now," I said. "And yes, it is my masterpiece. But you can't see it yet. The deadline is in another 3 days. You'll have to wait." Then I hung up. Day 18. Slept all day and all night. Had a fever and threw up multiple times. My dreams were benign, mostly of a corpulent woman farting in my face while fanning herself with a peacock's colorful feather. Day 19. Still sick, awoke at 1 a.m. and ate some dry cereal as I've nothing but mustard and mayonnaise left in the fridge, as well as some week-old Chinese food that is probably growing mold. When I looked in the mirror after urinating bright orange pee, I saw that there was a gaping hole where my nose should be. I tried to patch it up with some bandages, but the hole kept growing larger and larger. When I gave up on trying to fix it, my face reappeared in its original form. But something was not quite right about it. I don't believe it will ever go back to looking as it looked before I started the painting. I went back to bed after this experience. Oddly, I did not dream at all. I woke to the sound of the garbage truck outside my window. Was today Monday? There were 3 text messages on my cell phone, 2 from my manager and 1 from some company trying to sell me insurance. I deleted the latter and read the 2 messages from my manager through bleary eyes. She told me my patron would be at the studio at 8 a.m. sharp on the 20th and that I should be there to show him my work. In the second message, sent approximately 2 hours later, she said my patron had apparently been involved in a traffic accident and that he was in hospital and in critical condition. Would I visit him at Excelsior Hospital? I texted back, "Of course. I'll bring him a present too." Before I knew what had happened, I was in the car racing toward the hospital, a 20-minute drive from my home, my present for him in tow. So, he'd been in an accident? I wondered what had happened. Such uncanny timing. When I reached the hospital and pulled into a space, in front of it, I killed the engine and glanced at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were veiled by the sunglasses on my face, my forehead beaded with droplets of sweat, my nose crooked. Had it been crooked before? Lips taut, dry, dark stubble surrounding my mouth and jutting from my double chin. I pulled my sunglasses off my eyes. One of them was missing, the right. A dark crimson hole there instead. I blinked 3 times and my eye reappeared, a fat glimmering tear rolling down the side of my face. At the same time, I placed the sunglasses back onto the bridge of my nose, opened the door, and made my way to the hospital entrance. A very attractive, dark-skinned nurse greeted me. "How may I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for a patient," I said. "What's his name?" she said. "I don't remember," I said, realizing I didn't actually know what his name was. "Well, if you don't remember, I can't help you." "That makes perfect sense," I said. "Would you do me a favor, though? Please give him this." I took the severed finger, digit, the half-crescent ear, and the red paper out of my pocket and placed them on the counter. The red paper, I saw, now read HEX, rather than EXH as before. The nurse looked at me as though I might be missing a few marbles. I simply smiled, or was I grimacing? And I walked back to my car. I drove straight to the studio. The door was locked, but when I opened it, the canvas was missing. in its place, a box. Day 20. The box was empty, completely empty. I made myself a cup of tea and then returned home. I just woke up about 5 minutes ago. Today is the deadline, and my patron is dead. I received a text from my manager. He died in hospital of heart failure after the accident. Guess even those friends in high places couldn't help him there. She wants to put my painting in a museum where it belongs, as she said. Unfortunately, I cannot take credit for it. It was the work of someone or something else. Something much larger than myself. I simply cannot and will not take credit for its inception. I don't even know what it looks like anymore. A whirl of objects, colors, body parts? Or is it a smeared woman, her sex dripping paint like mother's milk into the lap of the astonished viewer? Or perhaps it's blank, a white canvas with a large hole in its center, though through which one can view snippets of the real world rather than a mere representation of it. Day ? I'm finished. No more paintings, no more patrons, no more nightmares. I look at my face in the mirror. There is little left of it, just a patchy outline of what used to be. I could paint in the details with my brush, but why bother? If it isn't broken, don't fix it. That's what my father, also a painter, always used to say to me when I was a child. Of course, it is broken, but that's just the point, isn't it? I'll leave things as they are and let future generations judge my life's work. The pills I've swallowed this evening won't betray me. After I've put down the pen, I'll tie these 2 plastic bags securely over my fast-dissolving head. My ear has fallen off, my nose is gone. My eye is missing from its socket. I point a finger at the moon, and the moon bites off the tip, laughs as if to say, "You're so naive, Marcel." In my final moments, I will ejaculate into the hole in the canvas before me, the canvas of the world. And there, in its fecund emptiness, those tiny seedlings shall blossom into something larger than life itself. And this is Girl with Smear. And I said it was the final story of the collection, but I was wrong. See, I haven't looked at the whole thing. The last story apparently is Syllannibal, which is the title story, which again, leave in the comments if you know what this is a reference to. Maybe I'll read Syllannibal next time. It's a longish short story. So that was Girl with Smear, and I hadn't read that in ages, and I kind of did forget many of the details. I remember the basic thing, but and I noticed as I'm reading it things I would like to change, and I kind of did change as I was kind of reading along. I was almost editing it verbally, and some of the so-called edits maybe weren't exactly how I would revise it if I had time to sit down and do, which I will do before reposting, republishing this in any form in text. But that's the story of Girl with Smear. And now there is thunder outside, just as I finished. You can't make this stuff up, right? I didn't plan for this, right? Okay, let's open this up. Is it raining? Yes. It is sunny outside, and it is raining. And I'm going to, can you hear the thunder? Is this showing the parking lot? There is rain falling. There's someone out putting stuff. There's rain on the ground, and you can see my laundry, which hasn't blown away today. But life is often, if not stranger than fiction, equally as strange. So that was my Girl with Smear from 2009, and it's sunny out and also raining, and there's a thunderstorm. Thank you for joining me today. This has been quite a pleasant afternoon. Saturday afternoon, Tokyo, Marc Lowe, current time 3:41 p.m., 27th of July. Signing off. I'll see you all soon with more readings, music, and who knows what else.